This is your government video for the First Amendment's freedom of speech. So here again is the text of the entire First Amendment. We are going to go over the freedom of speech section, which is the underlined portion here. It says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now, that's a pretty specific statement. No law abridging freedom of speech, but we also know that you don't get to say whatever you want, whenever you want, at whatever time. The classic example is you cannot go into an airport or you can't go onto a plane and scream, "I have a bomb." That can cause panic. It can cause people to get worried. Law enforcement might harm you. It would therefore threaten the rights and safety of others. So we're going to start with active learning. I want to talk about where you think that line should be on speech. Remember, the government is trying to protect the safety and security of the entire United States and its people, and you also have the right to freedom of speech. So where do we draw the line? Your questions here for number one: should the freedom of speech protect everything that you want to speak? Should there be no instance whatsoever when the government should be able to restrict what you're saying or typing or publishing? Number two, are there some things that the government should completely ban us from speaking? So words, phrases, ideas, gestures that are so bad, that provoke so much violence, we should have a list of things that are banned. And number three, should it protect things that are inferred but not spoken? So what if I don't say it? What if I use a banner or a piece of art, or I act in a certain way even though I'm not speaking while I'm doing it? Go ahead and hit pause on the video and give me your answers to these questions on your active learning. So just some context for your active learning. Remember, the Supreme Court always has this belief versus action balancing test. Supreme Court always upholds your right to believe things, even if they are unpopular, but not necessarily your actions. Your actions can be censored or restricted by the government. So actions can be restricted if they harm you or others, if they threaten to harm others, or again, if they potentially could harm others as well. So some things, just by being spoken, could limit the rights of others. In the airport example I gave, if you are purposefully trying to scare people, threaten people on an airplane by saying things that provoke images of violence, that's going to cause a lot of problems in a very confined space. And the government realizes that and therefore limits what you can do and say while you're in an airport. Now, the Constitution, of course, in most instances needs to be flexible. So it's all about context. If you're joking around with somebody and say, "I could kill you for that," that might be something that neither of you find to be harmful. But if you go online and threaten to kill somebody who has, let's say, a different political belief than you, then that can be seen as a threat. So it's not just about the words themselves, but it's how you're saying them, the context in which you're saying them, and of course, all the things that go along with the context. And then if you're not saying something, but you're doing something to infer speech, like an action, a drawing, a symbol, those are also protected in the exact same words in the exact same way that the words would be. And this is also referred to sometimes as your freedom of expression, which is an extension of your freedom of speech. So the first type of freedom of speech we're going to talk about is clear and present danger. So this is speech where just by saying something, it creates a clear and present danger, typically to the security of the country. So, people were being urged to draft dodge during World War I, people who didn't agree with the United States' war effort. The government, of course, saw this as a direct affront to the security of the country, encouraging people not to play a part in our military. And they said that this was clear and present danger. And the government, therefore, can arrest those people and restrict their freedom of speech, can put them in jail, because the government can connect their particular speech with a direct harm to the country or the country's military or its citizens. So it creates what they call an imminent threat. This is also the, yelling fire in a crowded theater situation. If you create a panic, which creates a stampede and people get injured due to something that you said, you can be held liable. Of course, if there's actually a fire and you're trying to help people to get out of the building quickly, then that, of course, is legal to do. The Supreme Court does not like to limit freedom of speech. The words in the Constitution are really specific, so this is what they say, giving it a preferred position. It would be very difficult for somebody to prove that the words you're saying caused the danger, as opposed to the person causing the danger. So you would have to have a lot of evidence to show that just by saying something, these people are creating, or this person is creating, a situation in which others can be harmed. So the Supreme Court does not limit this freedom very often. We talked about the case in Schenck versus the United States, which is the World War I example of people handing out political leaflets to try to encourage people to dodge the US military. Some other forms of speech we talked about in Miller versus California. This was the obscenity case, and they started to define what is obscene. Some people's definition of obscenity is different than others, and you have to try to protect some people's artistic expression with other people's obscenity. So they defined in Miller what can be censored, and there's a 3-part Miller test to determine what is censored. In Tinker versus Des Moines, this is the case about students who wanted to protest while on school grounds. So the Supreme Court can only ban students from using their freedom of speech if there is a substantial disruption to the learning environment in some way. So if you're just, wearing a band on your arm, like in Tinker, or let's say it's a sticker on your laptop or a patch on your backpack, that generally is okay. But if you are doing something like running out of class in the middle of the school day and screaming and disrupting classes and not going to your classes to learn, those things can be restricted by the school's administration. Tinker also tells us about symbolic speech. So in the Tinker case, they're wearing armbands. They're not actually publicly talking about it. They're doing something that is symbolic of freedom of speech. And again, those things are considered freedom of expression and generally protected by the First Amendment in the same way as if you were to speak words or publish or type words as well. The Supreme Court also has allowed flag burning. So you are allowed to burn an American flag in protest. This is obviously controversial. The United States is represented by the flag, but oftentimes people who are upset by the government or upset by policies burn flags in effigy. That is legal. However, you are not allowed to burn your draft card. So in the United States, when we decide to institute a draft for some type of major military issue, anybody who is eligible for the draft is automatically sent a draft card. That is a legal document which is owned by the federal government. So you are not allowed to burn your draft card. Some other things, libel and slander are either published or spoken words which you know to be false. So this is harming people's reputation, purposely trying to hurt somebody. This is, in order for this to be restricted, you have to know it was false and chose to say it or publish it anyway. And you also have to net a material loss, or I should say the person that you're slandering would have to net a material loss. This is why it's really easy for people to print lies about celebrities, because celebrities, even if their name is, let's say, on the internet for something that they didn't do, or people are spreading rumors about a celebrity, they tend to still make money on that. They tend to still get Instagram followers and make money off of their social media. But if they could prove that the thing was false, you knew it was false and you did it anyway, and that the person also lost money, they lost a job, they lost something that's material, then that could be restricted. You can't do things that are immaterial. You can't say my reputation was harmed or I feel bad. Those are things that are not quantifiable. Sedition is when people say bad things about the government, and in a country that protects freedom of speech, you also have the right to criticize our government, criticize people who work for the government, political parties of all types, policies and laws and things like that. You are not allowed to advocate violent overthrow of government. Now, in order for the government to restrict your criticism of the government, you would have to create some type of, or prove some type of imminent danger. So somebody was actually plotting to harm the government, was plotting to do something dangerous. And there has to be an actual imminent danger of overthrow, as opposed to just general, even very harsh, or even sometimes which sound like threatening critiques of the government. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's a comedian, Kathy Griffin, a couple of years ago after Donald Trump won in 2016. She did what she thought was a comedic skit in which she had a severed head of Donald Trump covered in blood. She was investigated by the FBI. It turned out not to be an imminent threat to the life of the president, and she was let go. But that doesn't stop her from getting a lot of social backlash for doing that type of crude criticism and sedition against our government and our president. Sedition sometimes requires that the people are urging you to do something as opposed to believe something. So people can say, I hate this political party, or I don't like that candidate. I wish they would be gone, or whatever. But you can't urge people to act on that. You can't urge people to come together with weapons, and come together with your weapons, and we're going to protest. It does need to be nonviolent protest. All right, for your next active learning, please answer the following questions and give an example of your opinion. And that example could be real or theoretical. Let's go question number 1. Which is more important to uphold people's individual rights and civil liberties, or protect the public safety and national security? If you had to pick one, which side would you err on? And number 2, should people's rights be taken away if there's just potential harm, but yet nobody has actually been harmed? And number 3, when does one person engaging in their legal rights start to restrict the rights of another person? Take a few minutes, pause the video, and answer these questions on your active learning page.